everyone. Ashley Mailloux and Mike Beer here with the Daily Racing Form. A really nice card this Saturday up at Woodbine. They have three graded stakes on their program. And Mike, we'll dive in with the first of the three. It's race number 7 on the program. The grade 3 Maple Leaf, a mile and a quarter here on the synthetic. This is for fillies and mares, 3-year-olds and upward. And a stacked field here. Obviously, there's 13 entered, but some really nice quality fillies and mares in here.
Yeah, big field. It seems like a pretty well-matched group too. Distance, I think, is probably key here, Ashley, with a big field like this too. You're just going to need to work out the right trip.
Absolutely. And we see it all the time at Woodbine too. I think the surface switch, even though turf and synthetic apparently play very similar, I think there are some horses, especially up at Woodbine, that they are more of a specialist on one of the two surfaces. We'll take a quick look here at the time form US pace projections and expecting a fast pace in here. The inside runner, the 4-year-old daughter of Nyquist, Aha Moment. She's been forward in her races, obviously at shorter distances, most recently at 1.16 miles. And you also see maybe the outside runner getting involved. Caitlin, Her Greatness, the plate winner this year. She was obviously forward in that event, but more recently at Keeneland, she wanted the lead.
Yeah, they did use her speed last time in a way tougher race against Grade 1 horses on turf. We'll see how they decide to play it from the outside post. I don't know. I do think I did think the one, was probably going to make the lead in this race. We'll see how fast they go. The time form US thinks it's going to be a fast pace. I wasn't so sure.
Okay, with a field of 13, let's get right into it. We'll start here with the inside runner, Aha Moment. This one for Mark Cassie. Talked about maybe using her speed from the inside draw. She's done that in her last several, even when you go back 3 races ago in the 7A. She was fast out of the gate, but the big thing here, Mike, this is a big step up in class.
Big step up in class. I think the distance is a little bit of a question for her too. Does she want to go 1.25 miles? I don't really know what to make of her recent form. That was the biggest issue I had, because she's one of the horses, or the kind of horse, that I try to get interested in. It seems like she was really getting good as a 3-year-old right before that layoff, and you expect them to improve when they come back at 4. And for whatever reason, I don't think it's happened for her.
Yeah, another interesting runner in here is the number 2 Millie Girl. Dan Illman and I did a lot of previews last year and even earlier this year. Big fan of this horse, but to me, she just hasn't been the same at 6 as she was at 5. And want to pick your brain. Do you think it's the spots and also the fact primarily we've seen her almost solely on turf this year?
Yeah, that's kind of how I was looking at it. It is a tough call, though. I don't know. You feel like maybe she hasn't come back quite as good, and then you look at the races that they're running her in. These open graded stakes races on the turf that are just way tougher than the races she was running in last year. I mean, listen, she was favored, pretty heavily favored when she won this race last year, and I know she came from way out of it into a good pace, but to me, she was clearly best in that race. I think she's going to be really tough in here again.
Yeah, and you try to make a case for her. You talked about who she's faced: Full Count Felicia, McCulloch, Warlike Goddess. We're talking about Breeders' Cup horses, a little
Right.
bit different than this group. This group is still tough, and she did see some of these fillies and mares in her first start of the year, but maybe that was the excuse, right? It was her first start back to the races. So curious to see how much love she'll take in here. The number 3 Ecstasy, our first kind of backtrack here for this filly. She's kind of gotten good as of late. Her last 3 performances have been really strong, but last time out, we saw her in the Ontario Damsel, and she was one that was able to use some of her early foot, and it worked out to her advantage.
Yeah, got a great trip in this race. I do like the way she finishes it off here. The whole field's chasing her home through the stretch, but she got a great trip in this race. Had to jump on them. Certainly improved. She's won her last 2 races on this surface. Another horse where I feel like class and distance are probably the main questions.
I think so. I do think the group, though, last time out at least was a nice test for her after failing at the grade 3 level a couple prior to that. There were still some nice fillies last time out. Wild card up next here in the field, the number 4, the Girl from Ireland. This one for Graham Motion. Romero Morale has the call here. When you look at those last couple, I mean, been very consistent, especially those last 3. Even 5 starts back had a decent performance at Laurel, but you're going back all the way to August of 2023. What were your thoughts on this filly?
I I mean, to me, she was just really almost impossible to make a case for. I respect the fact that the last 3 starts are the 3 longest races of her career, and she's run really well all 3 times. So I guess you could just say she handles distance. But she also, just based on what she's done so far, you can disagree with this or maybe agree. I mean, she just has to be way better on the all-weather surface than she is on turf if she's going to beat this field. And I mean, not just better, way better.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, from a numbers standpoint, her last 2 have been better, but they're still a little softer compared to some others you mentioned. Also, not having the edge on the surface. I guess my thought process is she had that really nice work more recently on a synthetic surface, and you're thinking this time of year, what are your options? pretty limited to try to dabble in stakes competition on the synthetic. Yes, well, but that was, a couple months ago. Maybe she wasn't ready for it. So she is a wild card in here. I think a horse that finally put it together last time out, we'll take a look at the replay, is the number 5, Fashionably Fab. A great storyline here, but also just a great ride as we look at her most recent performance in the Ontario Matron. She was towards the back of the pack, Mike, and just to be able to close like this, it seemed like getting back onto the synthetic helped her, but maybe a horse that could benefit from added distance.
Yeah, maybe. I like her overall form anyway, but I really like this performance. I do think that she ultimately got a really good trip in this race. I mean, it really worked out for her, making the move in and among horses around the turn. She never got stopped. She had Elysian Field, who's back in here, and Blueberry Fields, who's back in here. She had both of those horses behind her and having to follow her all the way around the turn and all the way through the stretch. So in some ways, she had a big advantage last time, and it worked out. But I also just thought that she ran really, really well in there, and I think she's amazing in this race.
I think it's just interesting. You mentioned she got the pace flow that she needed in the trip, but she was so much further back than typically we've seen her in terms of horses in front of her. And like I said, it's curious to see her maybe going to a mile and a quarter. It may work for her. It may work against her depending on the pace. You mentioned the name though of the number 6, Elysian Fields. What were your impressions on that performance? Did you just feel like she was maybe trip compromised compared to the winner?
I mean, I thought that she ran fine in there. Yeah, I mean, I could make that argument. I don't, if I wanted to, I certainly could. And I guess if you're going to compare prices and, this time Fashionably Fab is half the price on the morning line, I would probably talk myself into Elysian Fields, who just got caught behind that horse and then really just had no choice but to follow her around the track. I thought she stayed on pretty well through the stretch there, just couldn't catch that horse. Her prior start on synthetic was 9 furlongs. Got a really good trip in that race, and I thought maybe worked a little hard to get the job done, but I think the horse that she wound up out finishing is actually pretty good. I don't know. I think this horse, if the prices stay about where they are, I'd probably prefer the 6 to the 5.
Fair enough. To the 7, Tito's Calling, maybe a little bit more of a long shot in here. Last time out was second in the Eternal Search, but different sort of competition. We're talking about facing fellow Ontario runners, and that's not going to be the case here. She has to jump back to the graded stakes competition. And just wondering, last time out, was she flattered on the turf? She has to go back to the synthetic in this spot.
Yeah, a lot of questions. Surface switches, the distance I think is a real question for. They tried it on turf a few starts back, and she was nowhere in that race. I mean, I don't know. I don't see the one race that I can point to on her card, and we've seen her a bunch of times. I don't see the one race that makes her a contender in here.
We've mentioned the 8th Blueberry Fields here for Brandon Greer. She was third place last time out in the Grade 3 Ontario Matron. Prior to that, though, we'd never seen her at stakes competition. She seemed to be just fine at that level. Maybe from a figure standpoint, a little bit softer than others in here, but respectable last time out.
Yeah, in pretty good form so far this year, but still has to improve quite a bit. She the horses who I just thought getting the kind of ride that she got last time, even though she was behind the 1-2 finishers most of the way there. I just feel like when you're 45 to 1, you can just sort of take that chance, stay inside, see what happens, and I think ultimately it worked out for her too. I did like the way she finished in there, but it did make me want to bet her back in this spot.
The 9, Forever Dixie, we really haven't mentioned, but also exits the Ontario Matron. Prior to that, had to race in the Canadian, had to see Millie Girl in that spot, among others. What were your takeaways from her trip last time out?
I just didn't like it that much. I mean, obviously you can go back and watch the full replay, and everybody can just sort of make their own decisions about how that whole thing played out. I just thought, whereas the 1, 2, 3 finishers all sort of were able to get inside runs around the final turn and through the stretch. I mean, Forever Dixie was just wide to nowhere in that race. I didn't feel like she had any kind of a real chance to race. Going 3 starts back in that other grade 3, I know it was going shorter, but I don't know. I watched that race back. It was sort of slow early and fast late. And she was really running in there. I mean, I thought she was really unlucky not to win that race. She was a good 3-year-old. I think she's a little bit dirtied up now as a 4-year-old. I think the distance is going to be okay for her. She's 20 to 1 on the morning line. I think there's a lot to like about this one.
You mentioned me with the dirty form. That's why you're getting a better price on her. Up next in the field is for Jonathan Thomas Selenia. This is a horse that was 4th last time out at Keeneland. We really haven't seen her much as a 4-year-old. She's missed the board now in 3 starts.
Yeah, and it has never run on this another one has never run on this surface either. She actually started out, it felt like she had a lot of potential too. They ran that boggy turf course at Saratoga last summer. She didn't run well in that race, and she just hasn't been good at all since then. I don't really know what to do with her form. I know that she has some talent in there somewhere, but I don't know how you bet her off of her recent form.
And another one with maybe disappointing recent form is the horse directly to the outside, the 11 Ephrata here for Josie Carroll. Sophia Vivas has the mount. First start back off a lengthy layoff. They picked the Ontario Matron. Maybe that was an excuse. This horse was also 126 to 1, but when she was put on the shelf last year, this race was her last appearance.
Yeah, that's true. Didn't, run great in there either. I mean, it was a race that set up pretty well for closers, and she just couldn't really make an impact at a big price that day. It was a long layoff last time, so you can be forgiving. But she's another one who really has to improve, it seems like.
The 12 Queen Regent does have some experience over a synthetic surface. It came overseas. Most recently, though, has been in Kentucky on the grass. And listen, was a winner at Kentucky Downs, but I'm curious to get your thoughts concerning that this horse goes off favored next time out at Keeneland on more of a traditional,
Yeah.
configuration and was nowhere.
Yeah, that's a tough race to forgive. The race too bad. Those Kentucky Down races are impossible to evaluate, so I'm not going to give her any credit for it. I tried to judge her off of what she was doing on the all-weather surface over in England. I don't really know what to make of those races. Actually, did you have some kind of opinion on it? I didn't feel like she was necessarily meeting great fields, but at least it seemed like she handled the surface.
I think the surface and the distance, right? A mile and a
Yeah,
quarter several times was consistent, and it's always tricky for me to take that form and see what you can do, especially when as you mentioned, she wins at Kentucky Downs, and then she bombs at Keeneland. She's not there. I understand she stretched out from a mile and 5/16 to a mile and a half, but they tried something new, as you'd expect, going a mile and a half, 50 to the half, and she just
right.
was nowhere at the end. She finished last. That's the concern with me. I think it is positive though. Brendan Walsh is, shipped to Woodbine with intent and finding these spots, and they're going to give her a shot here, probably based on what we've seen, right? In the past, she's been able to handle the synthetic. I think the question is, do I like 4 to 1? Probably not against this group.
I think that's the main point. You're right. Distance and surface probably aren't the biggest issues for her. I think class is probably one of the issues. And the other thing is if you want 4 to 1 on this horse, I don't know. I think that's a pretty dicey proposition.
Yeah, I'm thinking more, I don't know, 6 or 8 to 1 would be where the enticing part comes. And even then, I'm not sure what this field, as we've kind of gone through it, we still have one more runner. It's pretty stacked. Sitting that final runner, she needs no introduction. We'll take a look at Caitlin Her Greatness's most recent start, which was different. She was getting back onto the turf, fresh off the plate win. She had some time off, and obviously it was a grade 1 spot. And they put her on the lead, which is something we've never seen from the get-go. But overall, I thought she still ran well. I know she's well defeated here.
Yeah, she did run okay in this race. I mean, there's nothing that she could have done, but she feels pretty in this spot. Just got blown up by that horse in the final furlong, but she just missed holding on there for second. She ran fine last time. Her Queen's Plate two back over this distance was obviously a good performance. I mean, I did feel like she sort of closed down a distance challenged horse in that race, but she got the job done regardless. And listen, she's a 3-year-old filly. She's going to take on some really tough older horses in here. She's going to have to do it from the far outside post. I'm not going to be surprised when she's competitive. Actually, I'm probably not betting her either some kind of short price.
No, and maybe she's a horse where you say can't use her at a short price, especially in the top spot. But if you like her, you maybe use her underneath on your ticket. So very curious, as you've kind of alluded to, not going to use Caitlin Her Greatness on top. And as we look at top pick time, I always expect prices from you 20 to 1 here on the 9 Forever Dixie.
Yeah, I feel like she stirred up as we sort of talked about when we were going through it. I didn't like the trip she pulled last time when she was behind some of these horses. Her start on synthetic prior to that, I thought was a really, really good performance. To me, she's always had potential. Didn't get a big campaign in last year as a 3-year-old, but ran well when she was on the track. And now I just feel like she's starting to get good right now. She needs a trip in here, but the price is going to make it worth it. I have your horse second. I think Fabulously Fab ran really, really well last time. I'm worried about the distance.
And I could go either way on that. I'm going to make the case for the distance because I think when I looked at her earlier form this year, even though she was winning, the way she was getting up, I thought she could go longer. Maybe a mile and a quarter isn't the right move. Maybe it's really a mile and an eighth. She's going to be maybe pace dependent. When I say that, though, we've seen her have the ability to be a little bit closer. And I
Yeah.
think now that David Moran took over for his kid, he's got that win under her, has some confidence, has maybe figured her out now, can hopefully use that to his advantage. I also did back her last time out. I have to be honest. I loved her in that spot. I got
Okay.
the trip that I wanted, but willing to use her here at a mile and a quarter. I think, though, as we look underneath, we have the similar thoughts. I think Elysian Field, she could go north of 6 to 1 in here, and I think that would be really enticing. She obviously has talent. You can't forget last year she was second to Paramount Prince. She has experience at a mile and a quarter, and you talked about it even at a mile and eighth, 3 back. That's a pretty good race.
Yeah, I'm waiting to see what kind of price disparity there is between the 5 and the 6, because I do think they're pretty close. And if they do bet it along the lines of the Elysian Fields just being a much better price, I could easily flip those two. And I didn't want to leave Millie Girl out. I think she is going to be a fair pricing here. Favored in this race last time. She won't be the favorite this time. She thinks she's a major contender in here.
Yeah, and was mentioned maybe getting back onto the synthetic wakes her up in here, but it's 9,562 for Mike. It's 513, 612 for me. It's Saturday at Woodbine. It's the Maple Leaf. Good luck.